Hello, everyone out there. We are so excited to have you at our Repro Reframe Town Hall, where we are looking at reproductive justice at the intersection of Black liberation. We have some dope panelists today, some updates about the Nebraska State Legislature session that happened, because that was an interesting kickoff to this session. So we will give folks a few minutes to get on and join us. If you are already watching, please share this on your social so more folks can see it and get on, as this is a much needed and integral conversation that we are having tonight. I hope y'all are having a good start to y'all new year too. I feel like I had a little break before the end of the year, and this new year is making me earn that break. Like, I'm already tired, and it feels like we're 5 months into the year, but we're here, right? And that's all that matters. We are here, we are fellowshipping together, and we are about to embark on such an important and necessary conversation with some brilliant Black people. Y'all just wait till y'all see these folks that we got lined up today. And if y'all never heard them speak, y'all gonna be in for a treat. Well, we are going to go ahead and get started. So I am Ashley Spivey. My pronouns are she, her, and I am the director of I Be Black Girl. If you are out there in virtual world, please start to drop information in the chat. I will be watching and we'll make sure that we respond, but we want to know who's out there with us as we are engaging. For those of you that have not heard of I Be Black Girl, we are a collective that exists to create space for Black women, femmes, and girls to access and reach our full potential. We are, our roots, like our DNA, is embedded of the work of Bell Hooks, rest in peace, of Audre Lorde, and other Black intellectualists and folks that have really named what does it mean to exist in the world as us. And so we actively work to create space that allows us to just do that, to be, to exist. And we center economic liberation and reproductive justice frameworks in our approach, in our work, in our everyday. Hence why we're having the conversation today, right? We are talking about reproductive justice and Black liberation. And what does that even mean? I feel like, coming into this space as Black folks, we've never really had a space to unpack of what does it look like when we talk about reproductive justice, and not just abortion access, but when we talk about the systems that surround our reproductive justice system, when we choose to parent or not, when we choose to give birth or not. Like, what does that mean? What does that look like? And what happens when systems have traditionally not centered us and have harmed us? And how do we reconcile those two as we advocate for each other? So I am excited to have y'all here today. I am excited to engage in this conversation, and I am excited to bring on Dr. Lex James. Now, she's not new to Nebraska or Omaha because folks have seen her before. The Women's Fund has done a phenomenal job of making sure they bring her into the work here. But this is the first time she's here with I Be Black Girl, so it feels really special. Dr. Lex is a sexologist. She is a writer. She's an author. She is a licensed therapist, a clinician. She does it all and is really here to talk about and give us a grounding on what is reproductive justice? We throw around this framework, we throw around these words, but what does this actually mean? So I am honored to bring to our streaming stage, Dr. Lex James.
Hi, hello. I love being here. So I understood the assignment first and foremost, to talk about reproductive justice, what it is, and tying it into Black liberation. So thank you, Ashley, for having me. I love my Nebraska, my Omaha fam. You all are dope and amazing. So as Ashley said, I'm Dr. Lex, she, her doctor, and I talk about sex a lot. I talk about liberation a lot. I talk about reproductive justice. And let's snatch some edges with love today, all right? So we're going to jump into this presentation. I'm going to cover a couple of things: what reproductive justice is, how it's intrinsically linked to Black liberation, what that means, how reproductive justice is actually found in just about everything. But you're going to have some takeaways at the end of today's conversation. So you can throw things in the chat. You can ask questions. I'll make sure I follow up with them there. You can always reach out to me. I'll give you my contact information at the end of this presentation. I'm only going to keep you for about 15 minutes. So let's go. So in 1994 is when the term reproductive justice was invented, right? And there was this huge international conference, and it was actually in Cairo. So let's talk about this international conference in Cairo, because that's real accessible to a bunch of people, right? Going to Cairo. Anyway, so basically the entire global world agreed that an individual has a right to plan their family. And that is centripetal to global development. So they were talking about this and going through this conference in Cairo, and a group of Black women in Chicago in the summer of 1994 was like, this is definitely like a women's right movement, and is led a lot by wealthy white women who have like class and status. And there's no way that these wealthy white women have thought about or can defend the needs of women of color and other marginalized women, trans women, women with disabilities, people just outside of their scope, right? Outside of their peripheral. And so the picture you see here is Dr. Loretta Ross, who was one of those women in Chicago who is considered a foremother of the reproductive justice movement. And we need to give her flowers now while she's still here before we lose her, because she has been a voice pushing this movement, helping create Sister Song, which is an amazing reproductive justice organization that give rights, funding, help, legislation to making sure that reproductive justice is upheld across the nation. There are 4 basic tenets of reproductive justice work, right? So as you look at those, it's the human right to maintain personal bodily autonomy. Now look, I was raised a Black Southerner. I am from Atlanta, Georgia. I'm inside 285. So I'm from the city of Atlanta. If you've ever heard a rap song, College Park specifically is where I grew up, right behind Creflo Dollar's church. I'm also a recovering Baptist. So this whole idea of bodily autonomy is new to a lot of people, right? I am also a parent of 3 children, since I'm currently a pregnant body. We're raising them with bodily autonomy. And we have to explain what that means, because where I grew up, children were seen and not heard, right? You had to move silently and you had to do what you said. But that's not what bodily autonomy is now. Bodily autonomy is the ability to decide what happens to your body. It's the ability to give consent or withdraw consent regarding your body. And we're raising a new generation with that understanding, right? Our parents are no longer the controllers of their children's bodies like I was raised, right? Some parents, some kids. We're still working on it. But in reproductive justice, every human being has a right to bodily autonomy. You also have the right to have children if you want, or the right not to have children if you want. And I don't want you to get caught there, because some people get caught there and it's like, oh, it's all about abortion. It's not. And you have the right to parent those children in safe environments and sustainable communities. Now, these 4 tenets are the pillars that create a canopy of care, a canopy of legislation, and really the backbone of the work that we do. When we go through these, I want you to note how it's so much more than just producing a child or making a child. And we're going to continue to explore some of their meanings. When we talk about reproductive justice and what it means, we're not just talking about abortion and abortion rights. Abortion rights have come under attack recently, specifically with the bills in Texas, which the other southern states will probably try. And abortion rights are always under attack. There's always some type of prevention. And we do have to realize that abortions have happened since people have not wanted to be pregnant. Since pre-colonization, abortions have happened. We need to have safe access to them. But thanks to Kimberly Crenshaw's framework of intersectionality, it's a little bit easier to explain these linkages that exist when we're talking about reproductive justice and so many other topics. So let's dive into it. When we are talking about reproductive justice, we're also talking about the prison industrial complex. It continues to handcuff birthers to their beds, to capitalize financially off of the lack of bodily autonomy of the incarcerated, which are typically more melanated people. They continue to move to the private sector where human rights are regularly violated. So, not only autonomy, but regular rights that humans have. They dish out crumbs of hero cookies for those incarcerated persons who volunteered to fight some of America's worst fires. And they did so for $2 to $5 a day and $1 an hour while they were fighting the fire. That's what incarcerated bodies technically earned. Also, their autonomy is weaponized against them because we do see in the justice system that sometimes if you're willing to go through sterilization, you can actually have time taken off your sentence. So if you're facing 15 years or sterilization in 5 years, it's a choice, but is it really? Also, as late as 2019, we saw doctors in the California prison system performing reproductive sterilizations, sans permissions of the prisoners that they did that on. So taking out fallopian tubes, doing hysterectomies, telling these typically female incarcerated people that they had to go through these surgeries and they were actually sterilizing them sans permission. So it's not something that's happening in the 1970s. It's something that's still happening to date. Furthermore, if you see this graphic, it also says no more borders and no more walls. And we're talking about loss of bodily autonomy being a reproductive justice issue. So when we're thinking about that, I do want to raise the fact that we have seen migrant families criminalized for trying to migrate, for trying to raise their children in safe, sustainable communities, right? Because these are supposed to be global rights. We have parents whose children were stolen from them while their wombs were literally still open from birth. And in this year of 2022, we still have hundreds of children lost in a system that have not been reunited with their families as of yet. And I ask, to the benefit of whom? It's a rhetorical question. I think you know. If you don't know, I urge you to go and learn more. But incarcerated people is a reproductive justice issue. Migrant people being criminalized at our borders, families being ripped apart, children being subjected to a system of violence and abuse, all reproductive justice issues. So it's not just about abortion. It's not just about birthing. When we continue to talk about how reproductive justice shows up, it's also pertinent to remember that you deserve not to have racist violence steal a parent from a child or a child from a parent. Over the last 2 years, the movements around police brutality have been heart-wrenching and hard. And we see, and most of us have always known, right, how melanated families have to navigate these systems in power. Because too many families have lost loved ones to racist violence. Not always by the police, but in this white supremacy of America, we have lost folks. And when I'm talking about those systems of power, I'm talking about the police. I'm talking about incarceration. I'm also talking about medical care and the birth rates of melanated people, specifically Black people, who have higher death rates and higher infant mortality rates during birth and during the first year of life for children. I remember I cried tears of relief on my oldest daughter's first birthday because we made it. We were not a statistic here. In my second pregnancy, I had to come to Jesus talk with my OBGYN because I didn't like her. And she didn't like me, if we're going to be real about it. She didn't like me either. I told her that. I was like, you don't like me, and I don't like you. And it's too late in this pregnancy to change doctors. But at the end of this pregnancy, we both went to alive Black people. And so we hold that fear. A lot of us hold fear around birthing, around how are we going to survive? How are we going to navigate this medical care system that still thinks that melanated skin can take more pain than white skin, that we don't need as many drugs, or we don't need as much management, or we're lying about our actual symptoms. These are reproductive justice issues. This also goes with affordable housing. It also goes with school zoning. It also goes with having nourishing food and access, and also funding, right? So I definitely remember growing up in Georgia. Again, I'm from Fulton County, if that also helps. And my school books were from North Fulton County. So the more lucrative and higher socioeconomic status school districts would donate their older or used books to our schools. And they always had some other school stamp in them. I was like, yes, we have access to books, and yet we don't have the funding to buy our own. These are reproductive justice issues, because you have the right to raise your children in safe, sustainable environments. And sustainable means access to clean water. So we think about indigenous populations, their reproductive justice rights are being violated. When we want to build pipelines, those are all reproductive justice issues. You have the right, you deserve to create your family on your own terms. Disability justice is reproductive justice. And I'm also going to say marriage equality isn't complete until people with disabilities can also get married and not lose their access to care, their benefits, because their income now comes up or increases. So now it's saying you're able to pay for your own care. When we talk about people with disabilities, also remember there's disabilities you can see and disabilities that are invisible. And oftentimes they're left out of the reproduction stratosphere of conversation. And they're often seen as asexual. So people with disabilities, it's not abnormal for them to, if they have like cognitive differences, to be put on long-acting birth control without their consent, without their knowledge, even if they want them to like be able to be sexual in some ways. Oftentimes people assume that they're not sexual, or they don't have the ability to be sexual. And that's not even with a medical diagnosis, it's just an assumption. That's a reproductive harm, where reproductive justice means that people are able to create people on their own terms. They're able to create their families on their own terms. So this would be able to say, yes, I'd like to try a birth control, hormonal or non. Yes, I'd like to try contraceptive. Yes, I'd like to learn about more than just the abuse side. I would love to learn more about pleasure. I would love to learn more about what consent, excuse me, looks like. I would love to learn more about what all of this means for if I want to family plan and what supports I might need in place. Disability justice is reproductive justice too. And I want to remind you that reproductive justice really knows no bounds. Everything is reproductive justice because of these four tenets. So we're talking about environmental gender identity. Oftentimes, trans people aren't told about the reproductive transitions and repercussions and things that can happen when they are transitioning. Or they're not given the information to be able to plan for a family before certain transitions are made. That's a reproductive justice issue. It's also a medical health care issue, but it's reproductive justice. When we have all of these other issues, it says immigration, accessible abortion, supporting birth partners, paid leave. Paid leave is a reproductive justice issue, right? Queer families and their access to medical care, wanting to make families and create families without experiencing trauma and harm because they have to attend to a women's center and nobody gets their pronouns correctly. All of these things are reproductive justice issues. You also have a right to be free from violence. And we have to remember that violence isn't always physical. Violence can be mental, violence can be emotional, violence can be financial. You have a right to be free from those types of violences. But the goal is always to ensure that all people have bodily autonomy, have choice on whether to parent or to not, and to be able to raise children in safe environments. It's all connected. So here's what you can do. You can use your power. Now, As a melanated, fat, pansexual Southerner who is a recovering Baptist, right? I also have power. I am highly educated. I have higher socioeconomic status. I am in a majority being cisgender. There are ways that I have power that I can interrupt where somebody else who's marginalized cannot. There are places that I will have access, even with my multiple types of oppressions, that other people will not. And so when we're talking about how all of these things overlap and how Kimberly Crenshaw created this intersectionality, and not the whitewash version of intersectionality that goes around, right? The, oh, I have multiple intersecting identities. There's many layers to me. Not that. It's not what I'm talking about. It's not what intersectionality is. Intersectionality is the interweaving of oppressions where sometimes people fall through the gaps because things do not and systems do not think of them. So you have to identify where you are powerful, where you are in the majority, where you do have the loudest voice and the most privilege, and use that privilege to interrupt for people who aren't in the room, who will never be in the room. That is your job, to say, whoa, we don't have other people's pronouns on this sheet, and we're supposed to be a healthcare agency. What if somebody is agender? That's your job. Also, you want to support the lowest rung. I want people to stop saying lowest person on the totem pole. It's rude to Indigenous people. So you can say the lowest rung on a ladder, right? Whoever the lowest rung is ladder. And this means that we're looking at people on the fringes of society, people who are all the way on the outskirts, who might not have the resources. So this might be people who have English as a second language or no English at all. It might be people who have invisible or visible disabilities, people who have mental health challenges that maybe aren't in touch with reality all of the time. Whoever is the lowest rung, that's who we want to see how we get them access. Because we know trickle down didn't really work, right? If we give the people with the most more, it'll trickle down. That doesn't work. We know that doesn't work because we got trillionaires and all of us ain't billionaires or millionaires, or some of us ain't even thousandaires, okay? So it didn't work. But we can build up. If we say this qualifies for you, then it'll definitely qualify for me. If this qualifies for you, then it'll definitely qualify for me too. So we can build up together. 3, get rid of the oppression Olympics. No, we're not struggling to see who struggles the most, right? So trans issues are Black people's issues. There are Black trans people that exist. LGBT issues are Black issues, are melanated people's issues, issues with religion, issues with purity culture, issues with incarceration. All of these things overlap. There is no putting one before the other. They all overlap. And they all have to be worked on together and simultaneously. And lastly, I want you to learn that conflict is an opportunity. Many times people think conflict is a threat and they want to bump heads. Not really useful. You're not really going to convince somebody else. But you can use it as an opportunity to learn more about this person's challenges, about what they might need, about access that you might not even have. So it's always an opportunity for growth. And you can always agree to disagree. That's okay. But you could build an ally in the making of that instead of an enemy, instead of somebody that's so turned off. So take time to try and realize that conflict often is an opportunity. Audre Lorde said there's no such thing as a single issue struggle because we do not live single issue lives. Everything is interconnected. So in this graphic, and I want to make it big for you. There we go. So in this graphic, here we see the road to what liberation looks like. The reality is there are some people who have a whole lot, right? We see this one person who's very, very short, who's actually in the ditch. I think some of us have felt like we're the people in the ditch. And some person who has a whole lot, who is standing above others, and one person in the middle. Oftentimes the people in the ditch are taught that to get to the middle is ideal. You don't have to get to the very top, but if you get to the middle, you're okay. And then we move on to equality. And equality only gives everyone the same. And we see how that went, y'all. It didn't go well, right? Again, being from the South, separate but equal was trash. It didn't work. And it still isn't working. As we still have people saying, oh, but we're giving them the same amounts, but they don't need the same things. They're not meeting the needs. We're not getting access. And then we see equity. And so equity is where everyone gets what they need to have access. But what's important here is in this picture, you notice there's still a fence. There's still a barrier. So these people can always watch. They can't participate if they want to. They can't hop in. There's not a tangible way for them to be in that experience. And then when we get to liberation, we see that the barriers are gone. Each person gets to decide, again, that autonomy, how active they want to be and how much access they desire. And it's actually attainable for them. If they want to move further back, they can. If they want to move closer, they can. They have all of those options. So with that being said, I want to leave on this Audre Lorde quote. Without community, there is no liberation. So being collectivistic, big word, okay? Collectivistic, as most melanated people are, it means that we turn inward for solutions and issues to problems. It means we turn towards one another and often elders versus being individualistic. Another big word, but the main root is individual. And that tends to be a colonizer, a white system of turning outward from community in search of solutions and common problems. This methodology, this individualistic-ism, let's go with that, is what our country has been built upon. And why, for some reason, we look to government, both state and federal, to create solutions when they are so far out of touch with the communities they are supposed to serve. So, if nothing else from today, before we get into this conversation, I want you to remember that liberation takes all of us working together in community, being intertwined and connected in each other's pain, in each other's needs, and also in each other's joy. Take that with you, because that interconnectivity, that community, is how we get to liberation. Thank you so much, Ashley. I appreciate being able to give my spiel.
And I'm just talking and I done muted myself. You would think after 2 years in the panini, I would know that I need to unmute myself. That was amazing. And you understood the assignment. Like, I'm just so excited. So everyone out there, we are going to bring on 2 of our amazing panelists, Michaela Atkins, who is an organizer for Ivy Black Girl. She is a sex educator, a brilliant young person working in the space. And then the legendary Brenda M.F. Council, who has been doing this work since I was a baby and still making waves. Now, we have a special guest too. I didn't publicize this, but we have Scout from ACLU, who is a Repro Justice and Access attorney, here to give us a quick update, because today, as you mentioned, Dr. Lex, the role of government, today was the first day of the Nebraska legislature. And there was some policy that were introduced that is anti-abortion, anti-Black, that really does not align to the frameworks of reproductive justice. So I'm going to bring on both Brenda and Michaela, and Scout, but we're going to start with Scout to really give us a rundown of like, okay, what happened today? So then we can pick that up and have that top of mind as we have this conversation about reproductive justice and Black liberation. Okay. Hey, friends, we all here.
Hi.
So Scout, if you would mind starting and kind of just giving the rundown of what was introduced, what are those key components? We both participate, our organizations, on a Repro Justice Coalition that has, and we'll be introducing some proactive legislation. So maybe giving a little bit of insight to that, just so our folks can feel grounded about like what's happening around us.
Right. Thank you so much for having me. And I'll just be quick and just kind of do a rundown of what happened today. And legislation can be introduced these first 10 days of session. So there could be more to come, of course. But basically, Megan Hunt is a reproductive freedom champion, and she actually introduced 2 bills today, proactive legislation. And then another bill she introduced was already on file, and it's carried over from last session. So the first one is LB 715. Now the ones that we've been working towards now have numbers. So LB 715 removes the requirement that you must purchase an additional coverage rider from private insurance to cover abortion. Obviously, cost is a huge barrier. And so in Nebraska, we currently have this policy where private insurance policies can cover abortion only if someone purchases this optional rider at an additional cost. So that requirement would be removed under 715. Then she has LB 716, which modifies the provider requirement so that certified nurse midwives, advanced practice, registered nurses, APRNs, and physician assistants could provide abortion care, including medication abortion. So right now it's limited only to physicians, but we know that abortion can be safely performed by these various other medical professionals. So, and then finally, she has LB 276 from last session that carries over. That had a committee hearing last session, and we're all going to work to get that onto the floor. But it is a repeal of Nebraska's ban on telemedicine. And people have probably seen that the FDA permanently now is allowing medication abortion by mail. And because we have this ban on telemedicine here in Nebraska, that federal policy change will not be increasing access to medication abortion for Nebraskans unless we do something about our ban on telemedicine for abortion. And then finally, we had LB 781, which is basically a red alert. It's basically Nebraska senators are proposing one of the most restrictive bans on abortion in the entire country that could ban abortion before most people would even know that they're pregnant. So that was introduced today. That will also have a hearing. So those are just the quick updates.
Thank you, Scout.
Thank you.
So I dropped in the chat the link to LB 781, which is the ban that we were talking about that we don't want to see. And then we will drop in the chat as the panel is going the proactive legislation that Senator Hunt has included. And so as we mentioned, and as you heard in Dr. Lex's presentation, right, abortion rights is an important part of this larger conversation. And so that's why we really wanted to make sure that we paused here and brought that up, giving that one, it's timely, right? And we want folks to be engaged in the movement with power and choice to understand what's going on and how do we use our voices. So I just want to pause for just a minute. If there are questions from the folks that are watching, drop it in the chat and I will get to those. Otherwise, we will let Scout get on with her evening because I sent her a random text like, hey, this happened today. You want to jump on? So she came fixed and ready. And I appreciate that.
I just put my stuff on. Actually, I took my blazer off and then put it on.
Miss Ashley, if I can, because our chat is private, I guess I could have dropped it in the chat. But if Scout would just briefly, explain, I don't think a lot of people understand. Their focus is so much on the case that's pending before the U.S. Supreme Court, and not realizing that the battle is at the state.
Yes.
And providing an explanation of, what would be the result, even if the Supreme Court would take an action that we would consider detrimental to access to abortion rights.
That is so important. And I think that folks may see like maps that show Nebraska. It's kind of like, it's like, if Roe falls, here are all these states that are not going to have access. And we, as Senator Council, former Senator Council said, like, every action is going to happen at the state level. So like, it's not a foregone conclusion that it will be banned at 6 weeks or 15 weeks. Like, we already do have a lot of restrictions, but anything is going to need to happen at the state. And I think that opponents and proponents of these restrictions are trying to kind of make it a foregone conclusion, which is not at all. It's going to need to happen at the state legislature, as Brenda said. Definitely.
Yeah.
That's a good
Which
point.
is why it's so important for us to be advocating
Yes.
now, that our voices need to be heard now at every step of the legislative process here in Nebraska.
Yes.
Right. Those politics are local, right?
All politics are local.
Mm-hmm. And it seems like, I think people, right, like there's so much going on right now, so much that is pulling us, right? If we look at the framework from Dr. Lex, like all of these things fall under reproductive justice. So when you talk about what's happening with mass incarceration and policing, with folks tearing down the importance of understanding the academic imperative for CRT, then you have like, right, like everything is on fire. It's hard to really know what do you lean into. And to your point, Auntie Brenda, is really thinking about at the state level where you are, how do you use your voice? Right. This is what's happening, and here's where the impact will happen. Right. Awesome. Well, Scout, thank you so much for joining us and giving this rundown. If y'all do not follow ACLU or Planned Parenthood, please subscribe to those newsletters. Those two organizations, along with ours, will really be watching this key issue in the legislature over the next, 90 days. It is a shorter session, so we will keep you up to date as things develop, but we are ready for the fight and appreciate Scout and all she does.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye. Okay. All right. So we had this bomb presentation from Dr. Lex, understanding the assignment. We have now Michaela and Auntie Brenda here to really talk about, like, how does reproductive justice relate to Black liberation? So, like, let's start there with that framing. Like, how do you see this framework, this theory, right? Like these guardrails of how we show up really relating to how we as Black folks become free and experience that freedom. So I will call on Auntie Brenda. Can you start? I know you said that you didn't want to start.
Oh, no.
But let's start with you, and then we'll hop to Michaela and then Dr. Lex.
Okay, thank you. First of all, I want to thank Dr. Lex. And the one thing about this particular venue is that I can't see who's participating, so I don't know if Luscious Lisa Schultz is on. I expect that she is, but
she's
I
in
want
that chat.
I want to publicly thank her for introducing me to Dr. Lex, and we being able to bring her to Omaha to expand our knowledge and understanding of reproductive justice. But it is so much intertwined with the whole issue of liberation, and specifically Black liberation. But reproductive justice is not simply related to melanated people. It's the ability of all women, but principally marginalized women, like people, like women of color. And when I think about what Ivy Black Girl is focusing in on right now, and Dr. Lex alluded to it, issues, if you look at what reproductive justice is, being able to decide to have a child or not to have a child, but in deciding to have a child, what are all of the issues of liberation around that? Access to culturally competent maternal health care, right? Once the child is born, having that child have access to proper medical care. And then the one thing that in Dr. Lex's presentation I was waiting for is, the whole issue of education. And many of you know that in my reproductive justice advocacy over the years has been to make sure that young people and young girls in particular have access to comprehensive or medically accurate, scientifically based sexual health education, so that they can make these decisions that they understand body autonomy. Dr. Lex, when you talked about body autonomy, I was reminded of a workshop that I went to where think about this in a liberating kind of way for young people. Think about when you were around family and you had old Uncle Rufus who always wanted to touch you, right? And you wanted to pull away, and your parents said, "Go over there and let Uncle Rufus touch you," right? And not appreciating that was depriving that child of body autonomy, right? We weren't even thinking of that, because in our minds we were thinking of that. This is a disobedient child.
Mm-hmm.
But if we're going to advocate for bodily autonomy, it starts from birth, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so when we talk about issues of economics, economic well-being of women, if we talk about political power of women, spiritual well-being, all of these are reproductive justice issues, and we need to see it for that. Dr. Lex alluded to paid leave. Why is that a liberation issue, right? Here in Nebraska, we have the cliff effect that people deal with. If a woman decides to have a child and decides to take a job, and because of her limited education, perhaps is in a low paying job initially, we advocate and we fight for job training that enables that woman to access a higher paying job. What happens to her and her children? She loses her child care subsidy
For an extra $1 an hour.
for an extra 50 cents, right? So
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we have to look at all of these issues from the framework of how does it prevent these decisions? How do they prevent women from reaching and achieving their full potential, and protecting them to the greatest extent possible? And if you look at issues in that way, through that lens, you're looking through a reproductive justice lens. That's it for me.
Thank you, Auntie Brenda. Michaela, what do you think?
Now, how am I supposed to follow that answer now?
Michaela,
Okay.
Michaela, come on now.
I mean, I think it's all of that. I think it starts before birth. I think it starts with the woman, or uh the birthing person, with having the rights that they rightfully deserve. Like, I think, because for me, Black liberation is being able to be and be safe while being. And like Dr. Lex said, it's about not just being physically safe, but it's also being mentally and emotionally safe. And so I think that when we think about how reproductive justice relates to Black liberation, we have to think about all of the barriers that come with Black liberation and achieving that.
Mm-hmm.
So
And I will add to the screen. So hey Andy. Andy just added that to Auntie Brenda's point into what you're naming, Michaela, that they're attacking sex ed. There was legislation introduced today to take away the State Board of Education's ability to pass sex ed standards. So again, like how is policy used as a tool for oppression to limit our reproductive freedom and liberation, and that actively is aligned to Black liberation and how that shows up. So thank you, Andy, for adding that into the chat. Dr. Lex, you gave us a lot. So if there's something else you want to add to this question, I will definitely open up to you as well.
So oh my God, being here with TT Brenda is like the best thing ever. All right, and meeting a fellow sex educator, Michaela, like I'm
so
in
can
love.
we say this too? For those that are not have the privilege of experiencing Black culture, for our Black women elders, they're aunties, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like they're the people that wrap their arms around us. So don't y'all after this session start calling Miss Brenda Council Auntie Brenda when you see her. This is a reserved term that we have culturally. So
yes,
TT Brenda, yes. I just wanted to name that for the folks that are watching.
Thank you for clearing that up.
Thank you. And unlike some people, I take no offense to that. I greatly appreciate that.
No shade, no shade. The things I wanted to add when we're talking about Black liberation is to remember that the Black folks who were kidnapped off of a continent have never had an opportunity to raise their families in safe environments. have never
Correct.
had that opportunity, ever.
Right.
From the beginning of the kidnapping and colonization, we've been raising families under turmoil and trauma, trying to
Yes.
keep them safe,
From
right?
the time
We
we
just,
stepped off the ship.
exactly, and drug off, right?
Right.
So trying to build that liberation and trying to graft something into a cultural lexicon that we did not create, that was not created to serve us. So I find liberation in finding joy, right? Because that wasn't something we were supposed to experience or have, but also teaching my children joy. So, TT, when you said about that bodily autonomy of Uncle Rufus, look, I got in a fight over the summer with my in-laws. I'm like, we can throw hands. I have no problems. My degrees are new.
Right.
My hands are not. And we had a whole court fuff. I got 15,000 steps that day. Y'all have been so proud because I walked. I'm like, let me walk because I can see me lunging at you. And I don't think you're gonna say nothing because you're like a major person in the city. You don't want that police report with your name on it. So let me take a walk because I'm gonna mess you up over this one right here.
Right.
And I literally told them, "You think I won't burn this house down? Like I have no problems." Right? When we're talking about the bodily autonomy of our babies, and we're starting to see that, we're starting to see them say, "Oh," and we're noticing that not just for little Black girls either, but for little Black boys who are also
Right.
just as sexualized, just as early. And we see that
Yes.
with the predators. So like getting to that liberation is peeking our head out from what we've always been taught and be like,
Yes.
oh wait, there's a different way we can do this. And this
Yeah,
way
and
actually feels
and when you're
good.
talking about Dr. Lex, when you're talking about incarceration, and how the prison industrial complex denies and deprives particularly women of color of their human rights, their basic human rights with regard to bodily autonomy and other things. We also have to look at the fact that before they get into the system, the pipeline, that school to prison pipeline where young Black girls are characterized as always being more violent, more aggressive. And if you haven't had the opportunity to read the book Push Out, to see how so much of this affects their ability to not only have children, but raise their children in healthy and sustainable environments. We can't ignore that all environmental justice is a reproductive justice issue. Right? I mean, you can't raise your child in a healthy and sustainable environment where there's no clean water, where there's no clean air. So these are all reproductive justice issues, and don't allow yourself to fall into the trap of people trying to circumscribe it as just an abortion access issue, because it is not.
And I know so there's the prison, the school to prison pipeline, and then there's also the pet to threat phenomenon, specifically for Black women,
Yes.
where they come into a company as the pet, as the shiny new thing that's
Right.
brilliant, until they start doing their thing, and then people get intimidated because she is not intimidating, you are intimidated,
Right?
And then they become a threat, and then they get pushed out of that.
They get pushed out. Get pushed out,
right, to where they are forced to resign or they're being fired. And we're seeing that in this country, Black women have to have twice the number of degrees as white men to try and make the same money. And people are like, oh, women make 88 cents on the dollar. White women do.
Thank you.
Asian women actually make 90 cents on the dollar.
Right.
Black women make 64 cents on the dollar and are the most educated group of people in the United States, which means we carry the most student loan debt.
Thank you.
Right.
Equity,
Indigenous
pay
women
equity, all of these issues, and hopefully there'll be bills introduced in the Nebraska legislature. I mean, every year there's a bill around pay equity, and people don't get it, right? They don't. It's almost like they have this mindset that people are asking for something for nothing, and that's not what is the case, and the strong case, the data driven case behind pay equity. If we want to have true reproductive justice.
So then
I didn't mean to cut you off there, dear.
So what where do we start, right? So, like, from the framing that Dr. Lex gave, from just this conversation, there are so many entry points to this work. So, for us with at IB Black Girl, we're looking at birth equity. We are looking at economic liberation. We're looking at young people in leadership development, and then specifically reproductive access. Like, those are kind of our four areas, because we know like each thing that y'all talked about is deep, it's nuanced, it's complex, it is embedded in the systems, right? So it can feel sometimes overwhelming of like, what do I do? How do I make impact? And so for Black folks that are new to this space of trying to understand what their movement looks like, how they advocate, what would be your recommendation based on your experience of how do they start? How do they engage in the conversation and the work? So we will reverse and start with Michaela, and then we'll go to Dr. Lex and then Auntie Brenda.
You know, I sat and thought about this question for a little bit. I was thinking about how do Black people show up and how do Black people engage in this movement. And I'm coming from it as a young person's mind and a young person's point of view. And I think that showing up can look so differently based on, ability and based on access. And we have to acknowledge those. I'm thinking in the mindset of young people and how typically like social media is something that's very accessible for most young people, if not for the entire population. And I think that one of the things you can do to start getting involved in this movement is to stay up to date and to know your policies and to know what's happening where you're at and all over. And then also having conversations and making space to unpack that, like we're doing here, making space to unpack that with fellow people who look like you. Um, and yeah, just staying informed and thinking about how XYZ or how this policy or how this bill or how this ban impacts you and people who look like you. So I think one of the biggest things is staying informed. And then from there, if you want to start your own movement, get it going, rally up your friends, whatever that looks like for you. But I think staying informed is first and foremost.
Thank you, Michaela. Dr. Lex?
I love those, Michaela. The young people in organizing has just been phenomenal. And social media, people always think it's isolating, and you'll talk to thousands of people a day. Um, to start, I do think, and I guess this is going to be my mental health plug. You got to start with yourself, right? Because if you honestly think about all of the things that we thought about and talked about today, it is inundating and depressive AF. It is hard. It is hard to break the mindset that you deserve liberation. It is hard to break the mindset that you're supposed to have access to these things, that you can go over and beyond, and that there are injustices that you don't have to take. So I would say getting yourself up to getting out of that mind space that people have always put us in, or those holes that people have always put us in, is that first step of realizing that there's more than just equity, that there's more than just this kind of trickle down. It starts with you and like, whoa, in your mindset. So if you can get that mindset of like, whoa, I do deserve more and I deserve it all just because I exist.
Mm-hmm.
Not because I did anything, not because I got a doctorate, not because I had this baby, not because I'm married, not because I'm a Christian first wife of a church. You deserve it all. I don't care if you the dirty foot Yankee girl going house to house. I don't care if your mattress is on the floor. I don't care. I don't care if you washing bundles and using your friends' bundles. Like whoever you are, you deserve it. You deserve to be free. You deserve to have liberation. You deserve to have all of the access to all of the things.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Auntie Brenda, any thoughts on how you enter into this work, into this
Well,
space?
I will echo what both Michaela and Dr. Lex have said, and I will add this. If you go back to one of the quotes, and I don't have it memorized, but that Dr. Lex said in her presentation, it's imperative that we build community. So, I think we need to see these opportunities where without a community, there's no liberation. And then that's what we've got to get people to see, that we have to come together collectively, to address these issues wherever that entry point is. Whether it's working on maternal health issues, whether it's working on abortion access, whether it's working on paid leave, whether it's working on pay equity, that we have to come about it as a community. That because there's no liberation without community.
Thank you. So, can y'all believe an hour has already passed? So we are about to wrap up. And as we start to think about, we do have a question from Grant. So I want y'all to think about your book or further readings that you can recommend, and then I'll drop them in the chat to answer Grant's question. But just wanted to uplift as we think about this. Especially for Black folks in this space, and what I have really been mindful of because of my good sis, Dr. Monique Liston. She runs Ubuntu Research and Evaluation out of Milwaukee. Well, technically they're remote, but does all the things in the world and has been a really great support on our eval and research side for IB Black Girl. And she has always pushed us and really pushed me to think about, like, how do we center rest as well? Because this work is at the consequence of us. And today I had to remind myself that as I was getting updates about the legislative session and all the things, and I'm like feeling the anxiety, right? Like, because I not only do the work, but I have to navigate this world as a Black person. And so what does that mean to live in this space and still do the work? And I just want to encourage for the Black folks that are thinking about this and the ways in which they engage in the movement, to really center rest, to center joy, as Dr. Lex said, and don't feel like you have to take it all on. Like, we all are working together as a community collectively to chip away at this institutional oppression, and it won't be solved overnight. So don't think you have to work 15 hours out of the day to get it done. And so I just wanted to name that too, as I think about ways in which people engage, that rest is radical in itself when we talk about reproductive justice. So as we wrap up, if y'all could give me any book recommendation or further reading or like person we need to follow, that is great. And then one call to action. Like, we talked about a lot here tonight and such good information. Y'all are so brilliant. But if folks didn't catch it, right, if it was a long day, we're just coming back from holiday, if folks couldn't really catch it, what is the one thing that you want them to walk away with? So think about that. And then a reading, book, or person that you want to name for them to follow. Dr. Lex, we'll start with you.
So the book I love is Black and Sexy, A Framework of Racialized Sexuality by Dr. Tracy Q. Gilbert. So it talks about liberation and sexuality and how to exude that and what that means for Black bodies. And an amazing person to follow as well. So that's Dr. Tracy Q. Gilbert. And my call to action, I think, would be in pre-contemplation. You don't have to do anything with it yet, but become aware of the organizations around you. So even if you want to start something, we don't need to reinvent wheels here, right? Who can you partner with? Who can you learn from? Who can you build with? Who can you offer your support, services, skill set, whatever, or who can you just witness? What can you share? So who's around you? Figure out those reproductive justice people around you, follow them, like them, share their stuff, amplify their voices too.
Thank you. Auntie Brenda, your call to action and your reading. Oh, I think you're muted. Let me see. Auntie Brenda, can you hear me? I think you're muted.
I'm muted.
Okay.
I said I mentioned Push Out. If you haven't read Push Out, and I'm trying to think of the author, and Dr. Lex may have the name of the person who wrote the expose on the sterilization of inmates in California. There is a book that chronicles some of that. So
there's also a documentary. We actually showed it. If you go back to our YouTube page, because the name is escaping me, we actually showed the documentary that, to your point, showed the path of the sterilization, what happened, who uncovered it, and what does it look like now, as well. So if people are visual, they can also watch that.
And in terms of my call to action, I urge people to connect to organizations like I Be Black Girl and the Women's Fund of Omaha, who have policy agendas that are grounded in reproductive justice issues, and to align yourself with those organizations and follow their advocacy platform, and engage in that advocacy around those issues.
Thank you, Auntie Brenda. Last but not least, Michaela.
So it's real hard to read as a college student for fun. But I do have someone I want to suggest. I had to watch her TED Talk for one of my classes. Her name is Michelle Hope, and she is a sexologist, an author, an activist. I don't know. Look, Dr. Mitch, you might know. I don't know if anybody has ever heard of her, but I think she's great. She's dope. She is this biracial woman, this Black woman, who is very open and vulnerable with her story. And so I definitely encourage everyone to check her out on her Instagram and just see what she's all about. And as far as my call to action, I think my call to action would just be to be open-minded, and to really come together as a community to discuss these things that just may be different from us, or that we feel like are tough conversations, or to come together and talk about Uncle Rufus and when I was younger, So I think that's my call to action, is to create space, like Ashley talked about at the start of this, to just be and to talk and to figure things out and make room to process everything that has happened and is happening and going to happen. So.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. I want to thank all three of you for being here tonight. I so appreciate being able to be, one, just in space and to continue to learn from you all, but then to be able to share this with our community. As folks that are out there that are watching now live, or that will watch the recorded version, I ask that you engage in this movement. We are at an important time in our history where people are paying a different type of attention to the issues that have always been there. The issues that Black women, especially, and Black folks have been leading, have been at the helm of. And so it is important for us, one, to uplift that leadership. We will always support Black women, femmes, and folks in this space to lead, but also really for Black community to get engaged in this conversation, because we are the most impacted. And we know that when we center those that are most impacted, there'll be a ripple effect for everyone to benefit. And so the conversation here will not only benefit Black community, but Indigenous communities, Latinx communities, white communities, right? Like that ripple is real. And so I really encourage folks that are thinking about why this conversation matters. How do they show up? How do you use your voice, especially at a time now when we're looking at policy that really perpetuates oppression and solidifies that in our systems. Now is a time to act. And so please stay engaged, subscribe to our newsletter, watch the things that we are going to be having. We have multiple town halls slated over the next couple of months. We have conversations with Ziana Bryant, who, if y'all don't know her, y'all don't know her. She got the statues taken down in Virginia and is doing amazing things around movement building in young people. We are having a reproductive justice and Black church conversation that you do not want to miss, as well as uplifting our other key partners like Planned Parenthood and ACLU with the work that they're doing as well. So please, please, please stay engaged. Not just in the short period of the legislative session, but in general, right? Because movement building is forever. So we are going to be committed in doing this work. So please stay engaged. Please continue to support our work and engage with our partners. And again, thank you to our dynamic, amazing, brilliant, panelists tonight. I'm always in awe of the work that y'all are doing, and just appreciate y'all spending a little bit of time with us tonight.
Thank you. Thank you for having us again.
Yes, thank you, Ashley, for creating
Michaela, Dr. Lex is good. I'm glad to hear that those babies are doing well, and there's a baby on the way.
Yes,
thank you.
All right, congratulations. So you keep raising those little fighters. We need warriors. So keep raising those little fighters. And y'all forgive me. I was teasing with Ashley before this started. It's time for me to go to church. It's Wednesday night in Black America. So I'm getting ready to go to virtual church. So bye-bye now.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you. Bye, y'all.